Thank you.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We're so glad you're here for today's discussion. My name is Gary Parker. I'm the Associate Dean for External Affairs at the Brown School at Washington University, where I also have the great privilege of serving as the inaugural director of the Clark Fox Policy Institute. Before we begin today, I just want to acknowledge the pain and the grief happening within Black and Brown communities due to the loss of life from COVID-19 that disproportionately impacts communities of color, and the brutality and loss of life at the hands of law enforcement that has forced people into the streets demanding the acknowledgement that Black lives matter. We hope that today's discussion about political action and power will provide some additional tools and insights on how we can effectively address and eliminate racism and oppression in all its forms. And we're so glad to have you as part of this discussion today. This is part of the Clark Fox Policy Institute's COVID and Race series, and we have, this is part 3. We have a few more parts I just want to share with you. Part 4 on June 23rd at 10 a.m., and I'm going to put a link for this in the chat feature so you don't have to jot this stuff down. We'll be looking at Native communities in COVID, reflections of the past and outlooks for the future. And this is co-sponsored with the Booter Center at Washington University. And on June 30th at 3 p.m., part 5 of COVID-19 and race will be looking at health and economic disparities in the Latinx community. And that's co-sponsored with the Center for Health Services Research and the Prevention Research Center. And on July 9th at 12:30, Adelaide Lancaster of We Stories and Heather Fleming of In Purpose Education Association will discuss how to talk to children about race and justice. I hope you will be able to join us for one of those 3 parts. And we have a few more in the works, but those are the ones that are set right now. I also want to highly recommend watching part 1 and part 2 of the series. They are powerful and sometimes painful discussions examining health and economic disparities and the mental health and emotional impact of COVID-19 and racism on Black and Brown communities. And I will put a link to those in the chat feature as well. Now, we want you to be a part of the discussion, so please continue to send your thoughts and your questions through the chat features, and they'll be curated by our moderators and share them, and they will share them with our panelists. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to our co-moderators, Atia Thurman, Associate Director of the Clark Fox Policy Institute, and Cynthia Williams, Assistant Dean for Community Partnerships at the Brown School. Thank you both so much for moderating today's discussion.
Thank you, Gary.
Good morning. Our nation is facing 2 deadly pandemics, COVID-19 and racism. And despite the rising tide of devastating impacts and disproportionate effects on the Black community, Black St. Louisans have the audacity to rise up in the face of adversity and continue to mobilize for sustained change. We are so grateful for the Black leaders who have joined us today, who are dedicated to building power, securing human and civil rights, and ultimately uprooting racist policies that have made Black families more vulnerable to public and economic crisis. This is not a conversation for the faint of heart, because we're not asking why the rage or why the civil unrest or debating whether racism exists or not. This is a conversation for those who want to know how and what now. How do we channel the energy of this moment into radical transformation? How do we galvanize the power of this moment and the personal and the political to build a movement that will achieve racial equity in St. Louis by 2039? How do we convert allies into activists to undo the wrongs of the past 4 centuries? My name is Atia Thurman. I'm Associate Director of the Clark Fox Policy Institute, and I'm so grateful that you all have joined us today for political action and power in the face of adversity. The Clark Fox Policy Institute was founded just 3 years ago at the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis, and we work to address systemic inequity so that children and the people who care for them have the opportunity to thrive. I would like to give a special acknowledgement to the Institute's director, Gary Parker, for his leadership and vision in producing this series, to Janet Gillow, director of the Brown School's professional development programs, for being an excellent producer of this series and a partner, and to Maxine Clark and Bob Fox, whose vision for a more just and equitable society is backed with an unflinching commitment to bring about change for future generations. I want to thank our sponsors, Clark Fox Policy Institute, the Center for Social Development, WEPOWER, RareGem Productions, and the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis. It has been a great privilege to co-create and co-moderate this series with my esteemed colleague, Cynthia Williams.
Thank you so much, Atia. As we begin, we offer you, our audience, an opportunity to reflect on the events that have so greatly influenced the progression of these topics. When we hosted our first panel in April, national attention had turned to the disparate impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on people of color. The second discussion focused on mental health and emotional well-being of Black St. Louisans and was held just a few days before 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery was sprinting past his home in Brunswick, Georgia, and was murdered because he looked suspicious while jogging. Today, we present the senseless murder of George Floyd that occurred on May 25th. Mr. Floyd was denied the right to breathe and was murdered by 4 police officers. This insanely senseless act was captured by a 17-year-old Black youth on her video camera. Coming into this third part of the series, we want to take a moment to pause and take a deep breath, an 8-second breath to center ourselves in this moment for what we hope is a pivotal moment in our personal commitment to justice and our national commitment to end racism. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. And I am going to ask us to just take that 8 seconds to take the privilege of taking in a deep breath. Thanks to all of you. And at this time, I'm going to ask our esteemed panelists to please introduce yourselves, give us your name, your organization affiliation, and how COVID-19 and the murder of George Floyd has reshaped your focus and social action. Welcome to each of you. May we start with you, Charlene?
Yes. So my name is Charlene Mack, and I have the privilege of serving as WEPOWER's Vice President of Movement Building. And the projects I get to oversee are our Tomorrow Builder Fellows, which is focused on early childhood education, our Chisholm Chair Fellowship, which is focused on Black and Latinx women running for elected office, and then our Power Building Academy, which is focused on developing those over a 7-month time to build power in their communities. In the second piece you wanted me to answer was around how this is impacting me, correct?
Yes.
So much as a community organizer by trade, one of the stories that come to mind is my father. He was a pastor in North Carolina, so I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, hence how I say it. And I remember there were a group of missionaries that came to our church one day, and they was like, Pastor Mack, we're just gonna come here every Saturday and pray for the people across the street. And my dad, he said, unless you brought, he was like, did you bring the devil inside the church? And they of course said no. He was like, then why come inside 4 walls, pray for the people across the street without getting to know them? He was like, walk those 100 yards, get to know them, listen to their needs, and put feet to your faith. So as I think about how this is impacting me today, I think about how we can turn our convictions into action and stop treating the death of Black people as a petri dish for our observations.
Thank you, Charlene. Gena?
Good morning. And I want to say, start out by saying, thanking Atia and Cynthia for asking me to be a part of this conversation series, particularly the topic for today. I'd also like to thank the Brown School and Open Classroom and Gary Parker and everyone else involved. My name is Gena McClendon. I work with 2 bodies of research. The first is I direct the Voter Access and Engagement Initiative, and the other is a Financial Capability and Asset Building Initiative at the Center for Social Development, which just happens to be within the Brown School of Social Work. So as the director of Voter Access and Engagement Initiative, our primary goal is to examine ways to maintain a healthy democracy that allows participation in the franchise of voting for everyone. Our primary focus is research that seeks to understand and make policy recommendations in regards to access to voting, voting processes and infrastructure, equity when voting in person, with a focus on race and income. So the question about COVID and the murder of George Floyd, how has it reshaped my focus? I could talk probably for about an hour about this, but the plus side, and I'll start there, is that I feel empowered. I feel, because of the protests, and there are more analysts on television who look like me, who can speak to the issues from the perspective of a Black person. Or when I see people like LeBron James and Michael Jordan and Oprah bringing this horrible situation to light with the hope of things being better, and putting their money where their mouth is. I just really appreciate that. On the negative side, it's confirmation that nothing's changed. You know, I'm a person that grew up primarily in the 60s and the 70s, and I had an opportunity to witness the civil rights movement as a kid, but never had an opportunity to participate in, but yet benefited from the civil rights movement. And so growing up and being able to go to college and all those sorts of things, I thought was my right, and I still think is my right. But what I didn't realize is that while the law existed and made things available for me and others, the racism is systemic and it continued to grow. So let me put it another way. I was under the mistaken impression that with my education that I had broken the glass ceiling, right? No, I didn't. I was let in, right? And so, and I say that because this racism, here we are, you know, 50 years later, and we're still having the same conversations. The good news is that it's bigger, it's national, it's worldwide. And with hope, you know, something can be done. There is a lot to do, and there isn't one fix for this myriad of problems that Black people have been placed because of this situation. And also, I also feel empowered too, and I'll say this and stop, is that I finally feel like I no longer have to explain myself as an African-American woman, as a Black woman. I don't have to explain that anymore. If you don't get it, that's your problem.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gena. And Jade, last but not least, would you respond to the question about your name, your organization affiliation, and how COVID-19 and the murder of George Floyd has reshaped your focus on social action?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Cynthia and Atia, for including me in this panel. I have so much admiration and respect for my fellow panel women. And I danced all over everybody's possible choice there, but I'm just so glad to be with you two and to be joining you here. When Atia asked me, my company is RareGem Productions, and I guess it's summed up that my purpose, even in the name, is very intentional to be a uniquely positive media production company that empowers, that elevates and illuminates the voices of people that, and events and things that don't usually make front page news, or if they do, the perspectives that need to be included. So as you can imagine, with that being my focus, that I felt very compelled to respond. Only thing is, with George Floyd, as it differed from 2014 and Michael Brown, was that I couldn't find any words or any response for a very long time. We're 3 and almost 4 weeks into it. And I was so literally stunned in spirit. Now, I mourned for a very long time over Michael Brown and all of our children.
Mhm.
And maybe even still felt, I'm certain I still felt the trauma. I'm certain our community still feels the trauma of that.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't really yet processed Ahmaud Arbery. And then they just started flooding in. And so I just found myself bereft. I could not, but I couldn't pull away. So my first response was to withdraw and watch. And then I felt very energized and restless. Finding where that would be applied was a challenge. You know, for me, I'm often a bridge or safe space for people of differing opinions, perspectives, background. I can taunt that flag that Jade has a way of connecting with folks from all over. Not so much. And in the middle of an NPR broadcast, when the first moment I had to turn off the mic, I was at work weeping.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't explain it. The ugly cry, the mask full of snot. You know, somebody came in and I was almost like childlike infancy in how that felt. But then I felt convicted because that a supervisor and a coworker, and I know they mean well, came in and said, "I'm so sorry." And I received that, but then they said, "I'm sure this is especially hard for you." And it stunned me that you're not feeling what I'm feeling. You're not experiencing, this is not hurting, hitting, happening for you in the way that it's become present to me. And then they went on to say, especially as all my qualifiers, Black woman, mother, sons, St. Louis. And yes, something snapped in the way that the positive girl could snap. You know, my neck didn't roll, but my response was yes, and a daughter, a wife, a granddaughter, a great-great-granddaughter, a great-great-great-great-granddaughter. And I kept going until they were like, okay. So then it became, I'm not even aligned with you. So conviction turned to engagement. And the same person and situation and things that we're facing are now, were amplified with COVID. Made it blaringly clear that here you are in this room with the world that you have and as you know it. And then we had Ahmaud Arbery. Then we had George. Then we had the unrest. But then we saw 50 states. And then we saw internationally. Then we saw our neighbors. Then we saw rabbis. Then I felt, okay, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
My platform became very much more poignant about specifically our issues, where I would be gentle with that. I didn't turn aggressive. I noticed some of us would beat up one another. Well, why are you putting up a black square? Don't support, put up a black square. I was like, well, shoot, what do I put up? And I said, well, put up your voice. You mentioned, Cynthia, at the beginning, that the privilege of breath really settled in with me. And if my breath and my platform and the work that I do gives rise and space for others, I said, one, I was aligned in the first place, and now my focus is even more specific. And I found organizations feel the same way. In fact, I was on another call before this with folks that are ready to rally. And I do believe that this is an impetus, a catalyst for, yes, I know we've said it before. I don't know if y'all even remember the walk that they had in our community, and so many. This, either it feels different, we've matured or something, but there comes a point where there's only so much that can be contained in the space. And when it's exposed and the lid is taken off, we then can really compel and make some movement happen.
Thank you, Jade. I'm going to go to a question to all of our panelists, and you alluded to it very nicely, Jade, as well as our other panelists. Our nation is storming, and there are a lot of conditions that are responsible for the current political and social climate. The question is, in your opinion, what is at the eye of this storm? So I'll let you jump in. I won't pick you this. I won't volunteer you. So will you please choose to respond? What is at the eye of the storm that we are facing?
Well, I'll go first. The eye of the storm for me is the notion or the thought that people have to choose between their health and participating in democracy. The eye of the storm is all of these different things that are happening worldwide to prevent us from being able to vote, anybody. And so, I'll give you an example, and I'm sure most of you have read about this or heard about it, is what happened in Wisconsin on April the 7th, when all of those people were in line for hours and hours and hours and hours. But here's the kicker part of all of this. The ruling from the Supreme Court judge literally came down the evening before election. You know, it's things like the Kentucky State Legislature overriding the governor's veto to institute a new voter ID law. It's New Mexico's Supreme Court that unanimously blocked an emergency petition that would have shifted their June primary election to be conducted mainly through mail-in ballots. It is Georgia, Tuesday. Their election was changed twice. Brand new equipment that they spent like $100 million for this equipment, and people were still literally standing in line for hours and hours and hours and hours. Untrained people, polling places were closed. You have the mayor's father or grandfather of Atlanta was told that his voter registration was invalid because he had been to prison. This man had voted 52 times in his lifetime, but all of a sudden, it's things like the Secretary of State in Missouri currently is sitting on $6 million that they could use to strengthen procedures and create protocols to protect voters with money that they have right now. I'm not talking about the stimulus money. They did a request, and I saw the letter maybe about a month and a half ago, where they've asked for a little over $7 million of the stimulus money, supposedly to help with voting. And they're doing a match, according to this letter, of about 1.5. So we're talking about $9 million. The letter that they sent to the Election Commission, the EEA, basically just said that they were going to use the money for education. So, and then they're I could just go on and on, but I'll stop here. And that is on May 29th, Governor Parsons signed Senate Bill 631 on June, on May 29th, he was supposed to sign a bill. He actually didn't sign it until June 4th, that to expand the vote by mail. But on May 29th, during one of his COVID updates, someone asked him the question about Missourians feeling safe when they go to vote in person. And he said, I hope people feel safe to go out and vote, but if they don't, you know the number one thing is their safety should be number one. So if you don't, then don't go vote. That was the essence of what he said. If you don't feel safe, don't vote. So he did sign this two measures, but I'll talk about that later. I'll let Charlene and Jade comment.
Thank you, Gena.
Yeah, sure. I don't mind jumping in. So I don't want to be over assumptuous and say what I believe, but I believe something that contributes to the eye of the storm is honestly our unwillingness to live in the tension from day to day. Like, how many subtle nods of racism do we quietly ignore when it comes to Black female leadership, when it comes to white men taking ideas that don't belong to them? Something that we teach in the world of community organizing, and I might get some reactions, I'm pretty direct. My dad taught me to embrace all of me. And my mama, but so like the Bible Belt thing left me a while ago. But anyway, so something that we teach in the world of community organizing is that you have the world as it is and the world as it should be. And oftentimes we live in the world as it should be to our detriment. And the world as it should be consists of love, justice, data, altruism, and the recognition of common humanity. But we know that that's not enough. Like, I am a beautiful person. I should not be single. Like, that's the world as it should be. But the world as it is grounded in a different type of reality that we sometimes ignore. The world as it is rooted in relationships, power, and self-interest. And oftentimes we forget that, and it can be frustrating. And I get it. Like, I have 2 degrees, but sometimes people don't see that when they see me. They see a dark-skinned girl with natural hair, and there are immediate assumptions. So in the world of community organizing, we believe that you need to live in the world as it is to get to the world as it should be and navigate the tension between the two. And that's understanding your power, understanding self-interest, and understanding that this world operates on relationships. Data is not enough. We know how Black people and brown people are treated. If stories were enough, then we would have solved racism, ageism, sexism, all the isms a long time ago. We need to organize and build power with intentionality.
Thank you, Charlene. Jade?
I'm not having spasms. Charlene's just in that space for me.
I mean, you took me there, though. Y'all both took me there. I'm just feeding off of y'all's energy.
But you know, something else you did, Charlene, and I was brought up with a grandmother who would grab my lip and say, stop talking back to your mama. Stop asking all them questions. Go on over there, sit down and hush. So it had become so natural to be in that tension that had been there all along. And what you spoke to just now really helped me with this analogy of this question that Cynthia put out here, because she said she's gonna give us the doozies. It's a storm. So to have an eye of a storm, there has to be a storm. Because by definition, the eye of the storm is the calm in the center, in the region of the center.
That's right.
So one, I gotta appreciate that tension is no longer something that can be contained, that it's swirling like a storm, a hurricane, a monsoon. But to not recognize that there is a region at the center of this that we began our conversation with, but the conversation isn't beginning with the calm that's in the region of the center. We're talking about the stuff that's in the storm. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Let's acknowledge that. Yes, there is a storm, but in the center is the one place where you're not tossed about, caught up in debris, misdirected, out of focus and chaos, that calm is still. It's a place that we can stand. It's a place where we can speak. It's a place where we can demand. It's a place where we power. It's also a place where we see and hear. Part of my work is to make sure that what's being seen and heard is valuable, but let's also look, because it's not just George Floyd and it's not just COVID.
Yes, that's right.
Those are all the things that we now can say, okay, health disparities, all the isms. Whew, I almost got hit by more racial injustice. Is that a flying government along with the cow that's in there? You know, the things that become the debris have been the reality of what our community as a whole. So we're in this place where all that stuff had been going on, but it can't continue, because wherever the storm is, the storm will be moving. So will this space, this region of clarity and calm that can exist in the midst of that. So this is our opportunity. This is our opportunity with data. This is our opportunity with emboldenedness. This is our opportunity to call it out. This is our opportunity to take full advantage of the incredible resources and intellect and innovation that comes out of WashU all the time. A regular partner of mine, and so proud to be. Maxine and Bob, like, don't even get me started there. We are able in this space to not only navigate the tension, but if we're navigating that tension, that means we're navigating this storm. And that I feel truly, and I'm determined that we see all of those things put in perspective and addressed.
Thank you so much, Jade. I mean, reframing the eye of the storm to be the center of the calm and the place. For me, the eye of the storm is I am caught up in a vortex. The nation is caught up in a vortex that is finally awakening to the assault on Black people for 400 years. That we have been awakened to it because it is our life experience. And now the rest of the world is awakening in a global, sense of solidarity. But that at the center is a place of hope, that we still are centered in a place of hope, but we are demanding, and we are clear about our demands, more clear than ever. So I want to ask you, because the virus exposed just some inexcusable gaps in health and economic disparities. I mean, inexcusable, right? Undeniable. And as we are challenged to meet basic needs, as we're trying to get school lunches to children at home, as we're trying to make sure people get the COVID-19 testing, as we're trying to stem the tide of layoffs and furloughs that Black people will face and are facing, political action almost seems like a luxury, but it is not. So tell us, what current campaigns and movements demand our attention? What political action should we be prioritizing, and how?
I'm gonna take a chance to speak on this. If it doesn't move you significantly to support or stop supporting, then find the space that it is. I'm careful about defining for others, where you should be. I'm happy to say where we have need. And I know we've got data, we've got experience, we've got a lot of things to support that. But where I know we'll see the greatest results are where you're gifted, where your heart and passion and where you're compelled is, but where your greatest contribution is. Now, you might be skilled at speaking, but you might be really cold with, and doggone WePower keeps sending me this email about get involved, lady, in your leadership, but you might be skilled at this, but you might be a better contribution here because of what makes up all those three. So when I say should, if it's got those three, where you're skilled, where you're passionate, and where your greatest contribution is, that's where we need you. And that's where sustainability will happen. That's where the kinds of things that when this does get fatiguing, because it's already, we're only at the beginning of the hill. But what will keep you is when it's not so rewarding, it's not so visible, as well as it's not met with a whole bunch of resistance. When it's met with a good deal more resistance, that's where we need you. And then if you're not frontline and you've got some other space that you're able to make change, then that's where I want to see it. Now, collectively, the more signatures we have on reform, the more signatures we have on, shoot, look how determined. You mentioned that these people, that folks were 4 hours in line. They were, and longer, but they were 4 hours in line and longer. Go Granny, because they could have been home. They tried to have them home. Selma was an idea of stay home. So help for sure with signatures that need the numbers of us to have movement. The polls, the ballots, the benches, the appointments. We need those signatures, but most certainly, if it's in that space where it really convicts, you're really able to contribute, and you certainly have the capacity, let's go there. Hush, Poo-Poo. We want you there.
That was so cute. Thank you, Jade and Charlene and Atia. I feel so empowered right now. I want to go back to just something real quick. I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of late on something, but are you all aware that a young lady from St. Louis got Merriam-Webster, the dictionary people, to change the definition of racism? And I thought, oh my goodness. So what it put me in the mind of is this, the danger of the single story. If you don't have the story right, if you don't have the definition of what something is, what it is, then you know what else is there? But anyway, I'll leave that there. So to answer your part of what Atia was saying, I'm a junkie on all these different news shows, but John Lewis said, if you see something that's not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to do something about it. And so a lot of people, including me, are saying that this is this upcoming election is the most critical election of our lives, and it is. So if you are passionate about democracy, or if you're passionate in terms of democracy, in terms of voting and things like that, get involved. The first thing you do is vote. You know, the second thing is find some piece of that voting, that democracy that you're passionate about, or find people that will be passionate about. You know, make sure that you're educated and that you educate others about the election. Like, for example, Medicaid expansion. It was on the November ballot. It's on August ballot now. You know, and so how many people actually know that? Charlene talked about her organization being grassroots and that kind of thing. Get involved with WEPOWER. Get involved with something. And here's the thing. I think a lot of people don't believe that they have any power, right? I can't change anything. I can't do anything. To me, it's not how big it is. It's the part that you play in it. And if it's just something as simple as picking up the telephone and saying, hey, are you registered to vote? Did you do your census? You know, and then explain to them what that is and what it means, and that they are a part of it, it makes a difference. I really do. A lot of the, some of the absentee voting stuff is going to require a notary. Become a notary if you can afford to do it. It's not super, super expensive. I just did it. I think I spent less than $100. If you don't want to be a notary, give somebody some money so that they can become a notary. So help people register to vote. I mean, there are many things to do, but I think what Jade and I know Charlene feels the same way, and probably everybody on the call, you have to find something that you're passionate about. I'll never forget this. I went to this women's luncheon thing that Color Change did a couple of years ago. I don't know if you all were participated in or were part of it. But this young woman came up to me and she looked at me and she said, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, so-and-so." And she said, "And I do so-and-so, so-and-so." She said, "What's your thing?" And I looked at her and I smiled because it was so cute. I've never heard anybody put it that way. But what she meant was, what is your passion? What is it? What do you do? And she wasn't looking for anything big. She just, the point that I got from her, from that question was, are you involved? And if you're not, this is something you need to think about. Finding a passion and getting involved.
May I ask you, I believe that I'm going to get a few emails on the statement that I made about breathing being a privilege. So I really want to present something that I recently experienced. My son-in-law is 6'4". He's in his 40s. He had an accident. It was not his fault. He's not brown. He's good and black. Handsome young man. And he called the police. The accident was not his fault. But by the time the interaction with the police was completed, he had been tased and his face was on the ground. And so the question that I want to ask the panel is that violent interactions between Black men and women with police officers often yield fatal or critical consequences at a rate that's 3 times that of whites. So the question is, how does this impact the current social movements that you guys are involved in, or your social action? Because I have to tell you, every time someone asks me how I'm doing, there's something else that has compounded my reality, my lived world. So when I say breathing is a privilege, it's a privilege, it's a right here because we're protected. But when we go into the street, depending on who we interact with, it's a privilege. The right is taken away. So I present that question to say, how does this violence against Black men and women impact current social movements, in your opinion? Can I start with you, Charlene?
Oh, yes. You do not have to ask permission from me. I feel like I should be sitting at y'all's feet. So the way that I think that it, the way that I think that it impacts social movements, the police violence is, and this is gonna sound a bit idealistic. I remember when I won't say which election, but I remember that when there was an election and I asked my dad how he felt about the results and how people were reacting. And he was like, sit back, pay attention, and always be thankful when you can clearly identify your enemies. So when I see what's happening now and how folks are being treated, I think on one hand, obviously there's an amount of frustration and I have to reel in some reactions that I want to have or some ways that I want to retaliate. On the other hand, which is both a problem and a part of our brilliance and our magic, is that we are able to reimagine a world even though it constantly beats us down mentally, physically, etc. So that's one piece of it. I don't, like, as far as our mental states, it's a pro and a con. Like, we know how to reimagine, and it's also frustrating that we are also the onus is put on us to reimagine. Yeah, that's what immediately comes to mind. The other piece, and like the organizing strategy side, is that we define power as organized people and organized money. So my mind immediately thinks about how we can debunk those two things for an entity that's not properly serving us. how do we hit them? Follow the money. How do we hit them hard there?
Yeah. Do you want to move on, or did you want us to respond, Jade and I to respond? Because Charlene, she
yeah.
very well.
If you would like us on that part too, let me know.
You're shaking your head, yes? Okay. Wow, there's lots of different things were going through my mind as she was talking. And it's still hard for me to wrap my head around this. I'm a cop's kid. I grew up in a household with a police officer, but I grew up in a time when I'm from the Chicago area. And when my family moved to the suburbs, it experienced white flight, right? And so with that white flight came Black businesses, Black, everything was, a lot of it was Black. Now that was just in our little core but if I went out of my back door and across the alley, I was in another town that was very white, right? But the policing and what happened in our community was, if somebody was in trouble or had issue or a kid, something like that, he'd take them home and say, hey, look, he'd talk to the parents. So what I'm saying is that I didn't realize that I needed to be afraid of the police until I left my community, until I was grown up. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around why and what is this? But so I'm part of a lot of different organizations, and one is working with Transformative Justice Coalition, and we've been doing these tweet storms on different things. And so one of the things we did a tweet storm on last week was talking about this police brutality, and what was brought to my attention is how all of this got started in the first place. And we're talking about plantation police, where their job was to make sure that slaves didn't go from one plantation to the other. The badges are even the same as today. So we're talking about systemic racism and policing and things like that. But what do you do with that? How do you stop that? It's racism, it's this, but it's something else sinister about it. It's like they're the police, they're the chief, and you gotta do, and I ain't racist, but I'm the boss, I'm in charge. And it's just sickening. And what do we do about it? Keep fighting, keep talking about it. And hopefully at some point, things will get better.
Thank you, Gena. So we have a question, because you said keep fighting, and you talked about we have to really distinguish racism from an individual perspective, from how people live it, internalize it in their individual lives, and systemic racism, which is baked into the entire American culture and policies and programs, and it goes 400 years back and further if you think about Native populations. So systemic racism is embedded, and understand that systemic racism is a product, a symptom, and gave rise from white supremacy. And that goes back much further than 400 years. So we don't change it. Like we should focus on individual transformation, but collectively we have to focus on institutional transformation. And that takes all of us, Black, brown, and white, and however you identify. In order to make systemic change, we got to focus on policy. So I'm going to ask you a hard question, and you got to be ready for this question. But, transformative change demands policy change, right? What policy reform would you like to see? What new, different, or revoked policy needs to happen to advance racial equity?
I'm going to start with whatever it is that keeps us out of this electoral process. Even when it comes to, hey, I finally get to vote, my candidate options or accessibility is limited. All in all, it is a pretty decent system. as a system. You know, systems are designed to save you, with what's the acronym? Save you time, energy, and money. So yeah, but the access to it makes it, it doesn't work. It's broken because of the access. If a voice counted for a vote, a voice counted for a candidate, there's no reason we had such a beautiful, large, diverse group of potential candidates for presidency, and they couldn't even get on the stage because of some dollar value. So what is it? Do I get 500 per word? I mean, like, what is it? How does a voice of a human then get a space to be heard simply because of a dollar amount or price tag that's put on it, that then goes back to that old, long, age-old system that we were talking about. Give me 400 years before I can even grab a boot to get a strap to pull up. Even Dr. King said it's a cruel jest. It's a cruel jest to suggest that a man pull himself up by his bootstraps who doesn't have any boots or straps for that matter. Or that the boots he made now give you straps to pull. Like, it's just, so the one thing, equal access and equal may not just mean the doors are open. If she can't get to the poll, let her mail it in or wheel it to her, whatever you got to do. The voices and choices should be heard for everybody who lives and participates in this place. It's a cognitive dissonance that even to the very point of breathing. It's okay to breathe if, let me just say, if any of these scenarios where it says blank line, blank name, insert yours here, the tolerance level would change on so many things. If you just remove this and insert a person who any person in any of those spaces, once allowed the access, I feel is the very most important thing that can happen.
Thank you.
Because then we can speak to all our needs. We can speak to our health needs specifically for, it's got to be more custom, more direct.
Yeah, Tia, I think the problem with these times is that it exasperates and it shines a light on the inequities that exist. So there's a full spectrum of things to how we fund Fortune 500 companies and the bailouts that they receive versus cutting funding for education. And anyway, we get it. So there's so many. So my brain is saying maybe it's less about the one and more about how we collectively utilize our power to organize around what we prioritize. But I do know a couple of the folks. I'm a part of something called The Table here in St. Louis, led by Jessica Worley, and it's a group of organizers that get together from all over, lead organizers, executive directors, etc. And a couple of things that came to mind that were lifted were the work the Arch City Defenders are doing surrounding the 5-point plan for our future STL, surrounding defunding the police, the disarm, commission, and dismiss, the closing the workhouse, and the free to political prisoners, and their 5-point plan. And then also, I know that ACLU is doing some work around SB 600 and how folks are being policed and how it's giving law enforcement even more power. So those are a few that come to mind. So, and then also another one surrounding education is just the inequitable equation on funding. So if when the CARES Act funds are distributed, is it going to be distributed in a way that's equitable? Is it going to be based off of Title I? Is it going to be based off participant? Is it going to be equal and everyone gets an equal amount, which also is an equity? So those are the things that come to mind. Those are the things that I wanted to lift. So SB 600, Arch City Defenders 5-point plan, and then some more equitable formulas around funding when it comes to education, which also assumes that we have a transparent budget in the first place. So that's a whole nother conversation.
Thank you. So we want to, Gena, did you want to answer that? Because I know you have like.
Well, I can save it for my closing comments or whatever the last question, but it wasn't so much that I was thinking about policies as much as other things. So like, for example, you know, there only seems to be like 2 civil rights attorneys. You know, so how do we, you know, find civil rights attorneys for the protesters that have been arrested? Who's helping them? You know, so things like that, I'm not an attorney, there's not a whole lot I can do about it, but I just want to raise that issue. How do we do that? And I get the other thing I wanted to, well, no, I'll stop there. I'll wait until, are you going to do the last question?
Well, what we want to do is we want to acknowledge that it is 11:03. So we understand that there are some of our guests may have to move on to other commitments, and we want to honor that and tell them, thank you so much for being here. We did monitor the chat a little bit. This time went by very quickly, as it always does. We don't have enough time for these conversations. We're going to make more time for these conversations. However, if there are people who can stay on, and if our panelists can stay on for a little while longer, we will continue this conversation. So Gena, I want you to have a chance to answer that. And we definitely want our panelists to have a chance to answer the question of what fuels optimism? What fuels our, you know, we have so many strengths as a community. How do we draw on those strengths in these moments to accomplish what we need for racial equity? And we do want to ask everybody what one message they want to leave everyone with before they leave today.
Well, since I'm still off mute, I'll go first. So for me, I think it's voting. Of course, that's my passion. That's I sleep, eat, and breathe all of that. But I want people to remember or even know or learn that it's not about the presidential race. You know, it's what's happening down ballot. So who's your local alder person? Who's your councilman? Who's your, you know, we vote on those things. We vote on judges. We vote on all of those sorts of things. And so I just want to leave people with the notion that it's important to vote, not because of the presidential election, but because of all the other things that happen. And remember, the president doesn't make the policies. The Senate and the Congress people create these policies. He only has veto power. So it's intentional to put all of the focus on the presidential race. And so I just feel like people should understand that there's more to it than just voting on the president.
I'm going to go with really connecting and aligning with people who are moving forward, building, and working toward change. Being a part of this panel is great. I've taken so many notes, and now I want to look into the table, and I want to see what the Arch City Defenders are. Maybe, you know, being aware that there's a program that's helping to develop new attorneys needs to know about, you know, some of the youth groups we're working with from BFL or even with the Alive and Well Ambassador. So get connected. There's all of this energy is a current and a vibration that one will draw you that to one that matches, you know, you'll have a frequency that resonates well with you, but please get connected. That way you can, hey, let's sit down at the table. The same way we're having a Zoom paint party, we could have a Zoom canvas party or something, you know, just, I believe that having where there's strength in our numbers, invite and allow other people in those spaces and participate in some spaces you might not typically. Listen in on some space, connect is the primary thing I would like to hold everybody accountable to. And that if you give yourself a goal of one thing, a day, a week, this month, or I'm gonna do this if I don't do nothing else in my lifetime, I will put some energy toward change, like something that I can document, recognize, or leave it, pass on to somebody else. So keep telling the stories. There's, you know, so much more power in if it's our story as opposed to history, then I think we'll certainly see some things change. I'm so glad to have been a part of this and look forward to the conversations in the future. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, I can just do a +1 to all the beautiful things that the things that my beautiful co-panelists have already said. Something that I would leave with folks is another sort of organizing saying is that we say that organized money beats disorganized people every single time. Organized money beats disorganized people every single time. Having 5,000 people in a space isn't the same thing as having organized people. Organized people know how to turn leadership systems and resources into strategy to dismantle systems of inequity and implement policy. So like, what is the strategy? How are we moving? And is this tactic something that's going to move our target? So there's an opportunity to build intentionality. The other piece that I also want to lift is the connection that my co-panelist already said is that that building relationship piece and working to build organized people, that people power. I just moved to St. Louis in February, and this isn't to flex, but it's to like, from Charlotte, North Carolina, I wanted to be sure not to come with an agenda, but to literally sit at people's feet and learn. And I'm really proud that in my first 90 days, I had about 200 or so one-on-ones with people just to learn. And I'm definitely adding the co-panelists to my list because I need to learn from these ladies. And so like, get out there, work across lines of difference, listen to people, but don't stop there, couple it with action. And then something that we're doing at WEPOWER, we have the second conversation of a 3-part series for navigating a new normal surrounding COVID-19 in our current state to heighten accountability. So I'm gonna just put this in the chat. So feel free to RSVP. 2 weeks ago, we had over 200 folks attend. We listed issues, we prioritize issues, and on this next call, we're gonna continue to prioritize and get feedback on what our demands will be. So coupling relationship building conversation with action for intentional strategy. And so, yeah, so those are the things that I would say.
Thank you so much. Cynthia, I'm gonna see if you wanna take us home.
We're going to go home, Atia. Thanks to all of our panelists and our audience that was able to stay. Again, thank you to Gary Parker and for the professional development team and everyone who has invested in spending time with us talking about these topics. I hope to see you all again. I have another panel. I have some things in mind that might interest you. So this won't be the last time. Expect to reach out. And my best to you. Please take care and be safe. Be good to yourselves. Anything from you, Gary?
Just how grateful I am. There's been a lot of comments about how wonderful it is to see so many strong Black women taking leadership. The future is female, and I'm so grateful to be within your presence and to be following your leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Some of you have asked where you can find information about the things we spoke about. I did put a link in our chat for the Clark Fox Policy Institute website. We have a website for the COVID-19 and race series where we do house resources, links, articles, many other things we talked about. We're going to put up on that site. So please check out that site for information both about past events, current events, and upcoming events. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Be well.